Hi, my name is Krishna Acevedo, and today I will be doing my informative speech on the immigration detention centers at the US and Mexico border. Now, just for a minute, I want you to imagine or envision yourself inside of somebody else's shoes, a kid's shoes to be exact. Now, imagine one night you hear them arguing. You don't know about what, but they're just arguing. The next morning you wake up to hear them rushing you out of the door and telling you to pack whatever you can into a small kitty bag, and they tell you that you're going on a long drive or a long hike. Now, imagine that drive or hike is cut short because of US Border Patrol catching you and your parents, and you're forcibly stripped from your parents and forced inside of a cage. Unfortunately, that is not a lot of these kids at these detention centers do not have to imagine that, as that is what their life really is. And today I want to inform my audience of what these detention centers are and how they affect the children. These detention centers were built during the Obama administration in around 2019 for various reasons. The main one being to keep kids safe, as it was seen unethical to drop these kids off in a random city that they had no prior knowledge of and no way to get in contact with their parents or family. Now, how does it affect these children? As it would seem like a good thing that these kids are not left to fend for themselves in the streets. And it was until recent news about the Trump administration using these detention centers for more harm than good. For example, the original during the Obama administration, a lot of these kids, there was a rule set in place, a law that these kids could only be placed in these detention centers for 72 hours, no longer. During the Trump administration, that law was thrown out the window. As I'll explain later, many of these kids are held for much longer than that. Another way that these detention centers affect the children is the lack of resources that these detention centers have. They are, as I'll explain later again, these kids are left with themselves with nobody to take care of them. And finally, the lack of effort on the US officials' parts to get these kids out of these centers and back with their families or back with their relatives is astonishing. Now, to begin, I want to start off by saying the lack of resources in these detention centers is mind-boggling. A lot of these detention centers do not have caregivers for these children. And keep in mind, a lot of these children are usually around the age of 14, 13, even some as young as 2 years old. Now imagine you're an 11-year-old brother and you're left with your 3-year-old brother and you have to take care of him as you are the older one. Unfortunately, a kid interviewed by Clara Long, a human rights activist, this was the case. This was the exact case. He was left to fend for himself. Another case that Clara Long interviewed was a 14-year-old girl taking care of her 4-year-old sister. And it was reported, like I explained, that they had been in there for up to 4 weeks, completely disobeying the 72-hour hold. Again, with the previous case of the 11-year-old boy taking care of his 3-year-old brother, they were in there for around 3 weeks. And finally, I want to shed light on the case that boggled my mind the most. Clara Long interviewed a girl, she was not named nor her age, that had a bracelet that had her name and a phone number. The phone number was called by Clara Long, and her parents picked up, her US citizen parents picked up. They immediately came down, picked up their child, and she was finally reunited with her mother and father. Now, the lack of effort on the US part to get these kids back home is just mind-boggling. Finally, I want to explain that this is the case for most children stuck in there. And we, as US citizens, Me, for example, of Hispanic descent, am lucky to have a voice and have a vote. And something we can do to change this is vote for different US officials, different politicians, into we can vote them into office to change the rules about these immigration detention centers. Thank you so much. My name is Christian Acevedo, and this was my informative speech about the immigration detention centers at the US and Mexico border.